things because like I think I was like 31 at the time, and it took 31 years for me to get to that point of understanding that it's a two-way fucking street. People are doing things to each other. Like, and I love the fact that they made sure to point that out because then it takes it back to literally Veronica, where she's like, fuck you. What if I actually, that's what I wanted to do? It doesn't, it has nothing to do with what you want. This is my choice. This is what I want to do. And as choices go, I'm choosing to be with you, Dante. And all those things just like kind of connecting this ocean of experience and all these things that make movies like Clerks super important to me. And then you actually, look at Kevin Smith's maturation through the movies, and choice is also a very integral point in every single one of his movies that he goes throughout, at least in the next couple, right? Like, and funny enough, as we're talking about Kevin Smith, and I know I'm in the minority on a lot of these different things, Mallrats and Dogma are two of my favorite movies of all time. And Chasing Amy is not one of my favorites, but I love the fact, for a lot of different reasons, that the protagonist actually was a lesbian who's kind of against the fray. Now, that movie does get called out a lot in these times because of basically the plot is some heterosexual man, if he's persistent enough, can turn lesbian into, at the very least, bisexual. And frankly, I'm not here for that argument. There are plenty of people who can have that argument way better and more qualified than me. I'll just say I agree with both points and understand it. But to see it from the lens of the 90s moving forward, it was actually a very progressive thing to see. And it was pretty cool. And that's basically what happens throughout all his movies. And Clerks, to me, is like the catalyst of him really trying to prove that point. We talked about Dante, who didn't want to be there, but he chose to fucking be there. We talked about Dante in the sense that his love, who what's her name, Caitlin, who also, spoiler alert, absolutely ruins him by banging some dude in the store that he's working in the bathroom, who's also like basically a bum. So like there's so many choices. He chooses to continue to care about her and not about the person who actually cares about him, who also had her own choices. He chooses to do all these things. And also I found the beauty of Clerks is and we talk about how different it is, but to me, it actually was one of the best cases of some of the more classic story arcs and storytelling that we celebrate today. It has a protagonist. I mean, basically the 7 character roles in the story, it follows suit. It has a protagonist, it has Agnes, it has antagonist, it has a love interest, and it has a confidant, to name a few. And like plenty of great stories, the story actually runs through not the protagonist, but the confidant. We talked about how Randall actually is the person who points things out to him in a way that not only hits him over the head, and finally at the end of the movie, which is one of my favorite, we talk about soliloquies or whatever, one of my favorite just shots is Randall finally looking at him like, you didn't fucking have to be here. Like you chose to be here. So all this fucking groaning is up to you. Like that's your choice. So I absolutely love how it been choice. I do have to touch on a couple other things, and I apologize. I feel a little bit off my game, but it's all good. Anyway, the whole rebel situation and like the renegade guerrilla style of like shooting and moving and stuff like that. One, to me, it actually followed in a long line history of movies that were already doing that. Josh talked about this in the sense of this kind of being a primary or original, and I understand that. But actually, years before that, movies like School Days and She's Gotta Have It were the same thing. It was a guerrilla shot type of movie that was not only subverting pop culture in a way of what messages got to go out, but also who got to say it and who got to get it out there. So I always appreciate Clerks in the sense of it was a continuation of sort of a rebel yell against the primary Hollywood structure and what message got to get out. Very similar to what we were talking about way earlier before we actually started the episode, when we were talking about radio and what music industry was doing to us and who got control. And I pointed out that I had to listen to the same song for like 4 months at a time because I woke up at the same time, and because that's how radio worked. You had a playlist, you just went with it. It didn't matter if it was good or not. And then also it was super cool because by the time I actually saw Clerks, it was a year after it came out. But it was still actually, as I was pointing out at the beginning of my time, kind of contraband. And the way I got to it was I was working at a camp. It was a bunch of teenagers. Someone got a copy. So we all huddled around a TV to watch it. And it was treated as if we were watching like some unearthed video that no one had ever got to see other than like a few people. Because again, people have to remember, we couldn't just download things. We couldn't get things on demand. And at that point, even though Josh talked about working at a video store, you actually couldn't find Clerks as readily as you would think. It was a little bit more of a search to go find it, in part because of some of the subject matter that was in it and the fact that it was kind of unchecked. It got rating, but it didn't necessarily go through the normal channels. So sometimes you got like literally the bootleg of Clerks, which was super awesome. So, and then you get, and I have to say, I'm sorry, you have to say how the soundtrack went out did a lot of personal growth for me in a lot of different ways. It made me sort of reanalyze, as both the movie did and some of the logic that mostly Randall put out, made me think about things. And the soundtrack did very similar things. It made me sort of reanalyze how I looked at different artists, different songs, how it made me feel. Like I said, I was 15, so super fucking emo. Everyone goes through it.
God bless.
So and I'm isolated up at like a camp all by myself with a bunch of like other dudes. Like that soundtrack was kind of like a weird sort of soundtrack to my summer as well. And then you added to the rebel rouse of the movie, this black and white movie that most adults didn't even really know about. And then you take the rebel culture and the punk culture in the sense of like, as you talked about, Silent Bob and Jay. Well, funny enough, that was kind of like if you walked into a room and you started singing Jay's drug song, you were immediately accepted by like always a small group. It didn't matter. You walk into a room of 100 teenagers, you start singing that song. There's like 5 people like, yo, we're cool. Me and you, we're connected.
Instant acceptance. The test was cool. I really like your point about personal growth and in his filmmaking, because at that night, just you remind me, like I said, that when that night you came and he showed us that cut of Chasing Amy. In a sense, he's redoing parts of Clerks in that film, because the question of her past comes up. That he's okay with her past when she's been with the same-sex partner, but he finds out that she was with other men before that, and that suddenly becomes an issue. And she does a version of what you were talking about on Scandal, right, where she's just like this again. In that regard, I didn't even really think about it to that. He's pretty progressive and he's pretty ahead of his time, because
that's what I'm saying.
In both of those films, both the women are saying, hey, fuck you. This was my choice. This was my agency, and it ain't none of your goddamn business. And if you got a problem with it, hit the fucking road. So he's writing a stronger female voice there. You're definitely, you bring up other points about the plot.
It was the same thing in Mallrats.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a lot of that going on. Clearly, he was thinking about that, and then, of course, gets to throw in a lot of vulgar language and dick jokes in there. As
don't forget the dick jokes.
Don't forget the dick jokes. Now,
Smith. I mean, one joke that would not land right now, no matter what. But I'm sorry, whoever's listening. I know sometimes I may try to come off way more involved than maybe I am. But even to this day, I have a group of friends that if someone literally holds up a hand and starts pointing and saying, this, like Mouse, this dude loves the cock. I'm sorry. You can hate me. You can do whatever you want. I'm just going to be honest.
Judging the shit out Rashawn right now.
That's actually Arshawn saying, but like I won't say it. I won't do it.
Judging the shit out of Rashawn.
I understand why people would be upset, and to that I apologize, and I don't want anyone to be upset, but I feel the need to be honest, and it came from a Kevin Smith movie, literally came from Clerks, that became a running sub-joke in a lot of his movies, especially to the point where it got to the point where all they had to do was hold up the hand and start pointing, and you knew exactly what they're talking about. I was like,
Maybe it's wrong, but my friends and I, as we were leaving for many years after that, would yell, "Try not to suck any more dick while you're walking." Right? And I get that there's a lot of controversy with that, and maybe it's wrong, but goddamn, did we laugh? I mean, even the target of said joke would tend to laugh at that point, right? There was just something, I don't know, right? I get that he's saying all that. I think that's what makes him, what made him interesting, and as you say, to put in a higher point with that. To tie us back even in again with the pop culture rants though, and how he works it in again in Chasing Amy. I fucking love when they go to see their friend who is the black comic book writer, who is playing the role of a very strong black militant, right? When he starts introducing his character, White Hating Coon, right? And when one of the characters talks about, well, what about Lando? And he's like, oh, somebody always got to bring up Lando in the Holy Trilogy, right? And he talks about Darth Vader taking off his helmet, shedding his powerful blackness, and implying that we all wish to be white. And he says, well, don't we? I love that he had the balls to say that, right? Which is and of course the character ends up being that he's fronting and that he's gay and that he's actually best friends with these guys, but they go there to cause the controversy for his comic book. I just thought it was such a layered and funny and interesting scene that brings us as much to our origin story as anything else.
Yeah, I never thought of him as funny. I thought of it more as like he was complex, just like all the other characters. It's when we talk about the rebelness of Kevin Smith. I mean, like if you look at even Dogma and what he was trying to say through Dogma. One of the reasons why it's one of my favorite movies is he's not necessarily attacking just Catholicism. He's attacking the whole understanding of what we feel about with like religion and spirituality and like really throwing it out there. And he's got a couple other movies that I'm doing my best to stay as neutral as possible. But when you watch, he does a decent job of actually being a little bit more prophetic than we want to actually give him credit for. And a lot of that comes to his ability to be progressive in his thought process and through his characters.
No, without a doubt. And I didn't even realize, well, I think I know one of the films you're talking
about.
I didn't even know that was him. And I'm a weirdo, liberal, gun owner, the whole 9 yards. And I still was blown away by that film. Not to push that metaphor too far. But with that, let me throw it on over to the Star Child who wanted to back clean up today. You can, continue this open love letter, or you can, add your own 2 cents worth in, because what would a dissection of pop culture be without that?
You need it. You need it. You got to have it. I'm not going to shit on it. I will come out, straight, like for us, obviously it wasn't a big deal, but we all will admit that we knew white guys like this. We were like, well, yeah, these are just basic ass white people, and it's kind of not the best way to just dismiss the Citizen Kane of the 90s, but it was without a doubt, it was the Citizen Kane of the 90s. And I think about the first thing is generational. You're talking about generational failure, and I think it's important to point out that generations actually aren't interesting. It's actually always a small percentage of people that a generation gets really remembered for. Everyone else is pretty middling and average, and that's why they go on to get the office jobs and come to teachers meetings and rant about bullshit. Now that's our generation doing it, guys. Yeah, that's how that's it. We're the parents now, so we're the ones doing that dumb shit. So it's also partially that too, and that's why I think the interesting thing about Kevin Smith is that he actually is not that character. He understands these people, but he's not that guy. Like he sacrificed, he worked hard, he took huge risks and worked hard to be successful. That's not what slackers do. Slackers don't do that. Slackers, don't have all of this knowledge and information under their belts. Like they're not trying to make a heavier message, like someone told me that you know,